Palingenesis by Simon Hereward. Book 3, Heart of the Sear. Chapter 20, Heart of the Sear. It was time to prepare the evening meal. Eldred went down to the improvised kitchen to help, though she had no appetite or inclination to partake of it. She hoped to find the Viron girl, Ceridwen, there. Perhaps she would be able to give her tidings of the war. All day she had struggled against the fearful tension engendered by the news that morning that battle had been joined. Surely it would be over by now. Surely Ceridwen would know one way or the other. She searched for her as soon as she entered the kitchen area. The fires had been lit, and the cooks and their helpers were scurrying about already. The Vaedron in charge of the whole operation ruled over the frantic activity with an iron hand. Instructions flowed out from him unceasingly, directing the efforts of all the senior cooks, who in turn sent their subordinates running to complete the myriad of tasks in time. Eldred approached him tentatively. As soon as he noticed her, the small man gave a polite little nod and paused his issuing of orders to frown a question at her.
Ceridwen?
She asked over the increasing noise. He shook his head quickly, and when she did not make another inquiry straight away, turned to continue his much-needed supervision. Eldred pressed through the tumult and into the dining hall. Perhaps the girl was helping here. Someone ran into her as she stepped through the arched doorway. It was the girl, obviously in a state of extreme agitation.
Princess Eldred.
Please, just call me Eldred.
The girl appeared too distressed to notice this request.
Princess, I have to go to this Balruth's place. Will you come with me?
Eldred stared at her, fear washing over her.
The battle goes ill.
That I do not know, but I can no longer sense him anywhere. Something has happened. Perhaps...
She stood trembling, overcome with the possibility. Eldred guessed she was referring to Lund. With the youth wounded or killed, they had no way of learning what transpired in Nuria. Yet would it be wise to venture out onto a battlefield when things were obviously not going their way?
There is another boy who I can contact like that.
Ceridwen continued.
Rin, but he no longer responds, though I know he is alive still.
She gripped the other woman's hand.
Please.
Eldred's mind whirled.
How do we get there?
Through the gate. There is a gateway in the lower caverns. We used it to travel here from Lakeside.
There was nothing to do but nod in bewildered agreement. Ceridwen flashed her a grateful smile and proceeded to pull her along by the hand, hurrying out through a side passage. Eldred wondered fleetingly whether they should not at least find some weapon to take along, but then realized there would be little use for that if the battle had indeed been lost. Brithael's boy archers quickly gathered arrows from the fallen bandits behind the vanquished formation. Already the Viron line had reformed, even though only 400 spears remained in condition to continue. Lund stood at their head, his face haggard but resolute. The brilliance had not left his frame, and even his scouts stood a few feet away from him. The archers fitted captured arrows. Brith was about to give the signal that all was prepared for the advance. Ahead, the great beast was causing havoc among the warriors of both sides. He trembled at the sight of it, and looked forward towards Lund's form already marked by death. A terrible cry ripped through the air, long and piercing. As they looked on in astonishment, the beast lost its form in a whirlwind of ash and dust. All eyes were fixed on the terrible scene, till at last the motion ceased, and only a haze of greyish fog remained. Pandemonium broke loose on the field of battle. Chaotic fighting erupted all over, quickly focused round 2 points. The tour host that moved westwards to where their master had disappeared, and King Ranald's center now reinforced by Evrain's men. The western host was effectively cut in two, since Rafe and the Inrathians were now forced back and away from the others by the advancing tour. A jostling for position followed, with the marshland force ending up stretched from north to south in front of the King's Gate, facing the allied forces to the west. Rune stumbled back to the line he could identify as his own. The haze had lifted from his mind, and the flow of blood down his side and left leg had slowed. Soon he was among the Inrathians who made up the southernmost tip of Ranald's force. Hunnick was there still, and Beor. Both men regarded him with concern, though they hardly seemed in better condition. Despite the fine armor provided by the Septalia, Beor wore a deep gash on his brow, while Hunnick's left arm hung limp at his side. Both seemed ready to drop. They looked at him with something like reverence.
"You killed it,"
ventured Hunnick. He shook his head.
"No. It changed on its own volition. It is hurt maybe, but far from dead. Something happened to it. I know not what. All it had to do was crush me."
A shout from the north brought them back to the field. Hunnick pointed towards the enemy with the tip of his sword.
"See those giants? They rushed in to protect him as soon as he changed."
Malik's bodyguards, the armored tour champions, now stood among the rest, tall and defiant. They were fresh, not having been engaged that day, a fearful sight to the worn Westerners. Half a dozen broke off from the rest, escorting the hunched figure northwards behind the main formation.
"That's him then," said Beor. "He does appear wounded."
He pointed beyond the tour line to where several forms were approaching swiftly from the east.
"What are those? Amu?"
Hunnick nodded.
"Yes, I fear it is. Though
they fell silent, staring. Some of the running Southlanders did stop seemingly to reinforce the enemy host, but many continued past, obviously fleeing the field in panic. Another host approached from the east, in perfect order, if a little leisurely.
it's Byrand. How did that old fox beat off the dragons and that massive host?"
Rune was pleasantly surprised, if mystified.
"He had some help, no doubt, as we did."
Hunnick pointed to the rounded shields many of Byrand's men were carrying.
"Those look like Vadran."
The tour force showed signs of indecision and confusion at the sight of another enemy approaching. There was clearly a lack of leadership among them now, for they changed formation several times, unsure of how to face the new threat as well as the old. Rune searched anxiously for the mind of his son. He was relieved to find the boy still in the watchtower, only a few hundred yards away.
"Gareth, where are the Greycloaks? And the raiders?"
The reply was a little puzzling.
They have disappeared. I think it was Janos. He had a score to settle with Zar, he said. There are no more raiders either. Lund is coming up from the south.
"Lund? From the south?"
Rune had spoken this out loud, causing the others to swivel round to their right, staring. Sure enough, another force was advancing from the south, past the still smoldering platform where the grey cloaks lay in huddled heaps.
"Giants or no, our enemies are in a desperate position now,"
remarked Beor. As he spoke, arrows streaked in from the Viran band in the south, falling among the milling marshlanders. The tours seemed to come to life at this, and order was restored in moments. The huge guards directed matters now. They turned the main body southwards to destroy the small Viran force approaching so boldly. Almost immediately, the errant trumpet sounded the final charge, sending the western host surging forward with all haste to catch the enemy in their exposed flank. Men who were tired and hurt hurled themselves against the invaders from the southern realms. Victory was within their grasp, where an hour before they had prepared for death and defeat. Hunnick and Beor charged with the rest, their injuries forgotten or ignored, while Rune hobbled after them as swiftly as he could. The Vadran and Viran with Byrand closed in from the east, effectively trapping the enemy host. Within moments, the tired field erupted once again in desperate fighting, the huge Tour champions alone now preventing their force from disintegrating. There was no doubt among the allied armies anymore. The day was theirs, with nothing preventing their final triumph but these stubborn warriors still loyal to their departed lord. Yet the powerful Tour would perish rather than accept defeat. They waded into the fatigued soldiers from east and west, threatening to stop the onslaught in chaotic slaughter. Garelane purposely avoided them, his blade no longer able to strike with sufficient force to halt these juggernauts. Byrand stayed close by his side, suddenly cautious. It would be an empty victory if they were to be slain at the consummation. With the resulting lack of leadership, the Gilreth charge faltered. Their champions were spent, easy prey for the massive enemy warriors. Alone the Vadran arrows seemed to slow the Tour onslaught, though not one of the giants had succumbed yet. Their thick armor appeared to withstand simple missiles with ease. Byrand watched his men wavering once more. Malvor found himself in the thick of the fighting. All his many cycles of battle experience and training could not have prepared him for the ferocity and power of these Tour demons they now faced. The brutes towered head and shoulders over their enemies, yet moved with astonishing speed, laying low the Viran spearmen with single blows. The former captain of the guard looked at the weapon in his hand. Now would be the time to let go of the last of his suspicions. He touched the blade with his thought, instantly becoming aware of the pressing potential all around him.
Draw upon the air, the battle priest had told him. Your blade is called Gen, and it best uses the power contained therein, the air. Wild and tempestuous this day, all he had to do was bid it flow through this construct of Myral's essence. Hold it there, and direct it at the enemy. Not too much now, he thought. There had been warnings enough from those in the know. The men in front of him fell away under the murderous blow of the Tour warrior ahead. Malvor did not hesitate any longer. He ducked under the powerful sweep of his massive opponent's sword and smote the man across his chest. For a moment he was off balance, but recovered quickly. Strength seeped from his grip and he gasped, almost short of breath. His fingers tingled as if he had struck a hard object sharply with only the tip of his sword. The Tour dropped to his knees, the great weapon falling away from him into the dust. Smoke filtered through the gaps in his armor. The dead frame fell forward with a thud. Perhaps that was a bit much, thought Malvor as he prepared himself for the next assailant. He knew that he would not be able to keep up such attacks for long. Two enemies, having witnessed his slaying of their comrade, charged him. He parried the first blow with a practiced maneuver and evaded the other's thrust, though with difficulty. There was no time in this fierce contest to search for potentials in the air, he realized. He had not experience enough to summon the power while thus engaged in desperate defense. Vadran arrows, perhaps half a dozen, struck the two enormous figures, giving them pause. They appeared unhurt, however, and soon resumed their assault. Malvor had gained the moment he needed. His blade flashed green fire. The strike sliced through the closest warrior's raised weapon and ripped through the plate armor into his shoulder. The shock of it was less intense this time, but Malvor slowed sufficiently to receive the glancing blow from the warrior's companion. He backed away, glaring at his opponent, the blade humming in his hand. Warm blood flowed down his arm and into his glove. The Tour's eyes blazed with hatred as he closed on his quarry. Malvor half parried, half evaded the strike, twisting his body round and to the side. For a moment the man's side and back were exposed. He thrust the bright weapon into the body, piercing the armor below the shoulder to find the heart. Already he knew that the urgency had caused him to miscalculate again. A dizziness swept over him, and he kept his footing with difficulty.
You're fighting like a novice,
He scolded himself as he went after the wounded Tuor.
But then, that's exactly what you are.
He smiled wryly. The big figure, now defenseless, was cut down by others, and he looked around for a different opponent. An extraordinary sight met his gaze. A Tuor champion dwarfed the Vadran warrior that hardly reached to his waist. No, it was a Viron, he realized, wielding a blade that glowed amber in the gloom. A boy then, a boy like Garrett, of 12 cycles or so. The child knew little of tactics and swordplay, but the big man was wary of his blade, swinging his own sword in wide arcs, unwilling to get too close. Melvor brought his rapid breathing under control. Ignoring the flow of blood slowly congealing, he called out to the contending pair. Neither paid him any heed. The boy foolishly tried to parry a heavy blow from the huge figure. His blade was swept aside, and Imran's breath, the Tuor's sword struck him on the side of the head, lifting him off his feet. The senseless body dropped into the dust. There was no reserve, no thought of consequence or frugality. Melvor struck even before he was properly within range of the dark frame. Yet the force proceeding from the extended blade found the mark he had intended it to. The Tuor warrior fell writhing next to his young victim. The boy was dead. Had to be. Melvor looked down at the body, horror clenching his heart. He knelt down, ignoring the mayhem of battle all around. What was a child like this doing on the field of slaughter? He pulled off a glove and reached out to touch the fair hair, amazed that the boy had not been decapitated by the terrific blow. There was a bad bruise on the side of his neck, the scar of an old wound on the opposite cheek. The eyes flickered open. Melvor stared in astonishment.
You should be dead.
The grimace of pain gave way to a quick, fleeting smile.
Look!
Said the hoarse voice. The boy's blade was covered in bright letters, spelling out an arcane word Melvor could not decipher. Had the weapon protected him from the death blow?
Thank you.
Continued the strange child.
You would have killed me when I fell.
Melvor looked about him. The Tuor counterattack was failing. More and more of the champions going down.
Stay here.
He instructed.
It is almost over. No need to take on these giants anymore.
The boy regarded him for a moment without replying, then nodded quickly. The gateway, as Seradwin called it, was simply a stone arch sitting on a little platform in the middle of the cavern floor. A heavy-looking door guarded the way. The girl approached without hesitation, though Haldred felt her flesh crawl at the sight of it. She pulled back on the hand still dragging her along, causing them to halt abruptly. Seradwin looked at her in surprise.
It's fine. There's nothing here to hurt us.
She tugged on the hand again.
Come on. I've been through here before.
Despite the reassurance, Haldred had to grit her teeth to keep from crying out as they entered through the gate. The place seemed ordinary enough at first glance. A tree-lined pathway under a cloudy sky, leading on into the distance. Yet even as she stepped onto the ground, vertigo washed over her, and she had to reach out with her free arm to steady herself. They proceeded with caution, Seradwin also frowning now, aware of the menace and strange sensations absent during her previous venture through the trees. It was as though they were leaving the world behind, stepping out into nothingness, notwithstanding the testimony of every bodily sense that they were merely walking through the woods. There was no comforting presence waiting at the crossroads ahead to guide them. Instead, the mind played tricks with sudden imagined alarm when there was nothing to see or hear. Haldred found her distraught gaze fix itself on locations without the bidding of a reason. A shady spot, a branch overhead, a thick tuft of tall grass. There was something here in this place with them, though she could not sense it by sight or hearing. They came at last to a stone marker in the center of diverging ways. Here Seradwin hesitated, studying the strange markings on the rock. Haldred was breathing quickly, her heartbeat drumming erratically. There, certainly that was the shadowy figure of a woman among the trees. She whirled about, catching the tiniest glimpse of another form, perhaps a man, behind tall ferns. She freed her hand from the other and brought both up to her mouth, gasping.
This way.
Ceridwen took hold of her sleeve and set off at a run, dragging her along once more. One by one they were overcome, Malik's champions, outnumbered and leaderless, brought low by the combined efforts of Vadran bows, Viron blades, Aranite and Inrothian spears. Soon only pockets of resistance remained, and droves of enemy warriors were laying down their arms or fleeing in the hope of avoiding capture. Rune picked his way through the violent scene, avoiding all contact with the enemy where possible. The greatest task remained undone. While the beast breathed still, there was no final victory. Where had Malik gone? He came to a halt before the city wall and looked about for a sign of the Marsh Lord. In desperation, he reached for the watchtower once more.
Gareth, where is he? Can you see him?
He is in the city. He came through the king's gate. I think he has gone to the palace.
The palace? What would he want there? Rune limped between the imposing stone structures, passing through the king's gate into the silent city. Had Malik taken any of those formidable guards with him? He could not be sure. The sounds of war seemed strangely distant from inside the wall. He crept forward, watching for possible ambush. There were Vadran on the wall, launching arrows into the melee below. He could hear the occasional twang of their bowstrings echoing slightly in the empty streets, intermingling with his footfalls and heavy breathing. Ahead, the shadows stirred as two large figures detached themselves from the palace wall. Rune brought up his blade with a sigh. He would have to overcome this obstacle and expend more of his failing energy before the fateful encounter. They rushed him, sensing something of his reluctance. The bowstrings behind him sang out loudly, urgently, and he saw the shafts converge on his assailants, passing through the tiny gaps in their armor, piercing them in many places. The figures stumbled and fell, and he shot a quick glance over his shoulder, nodding to the Vadran watchers on the wall. Ahead loomed the steps of pale stone he remembered all too well, a whisper from the dark past. The last time he had walked here, so many cycles ago, it had been as a broken man, betrayed and bitter. Rune hesitated, struggling with the vivid memories, a sad longing breaking through the apprehension for things that were irrevocably lost. He was an exile returning, only to find the world he had carried in his thoughts and dreams to be nothing more than a shadow. There was a noise behind him, a dull thud as someone leaped down from the watchtower stairs. He swiveled round, expecting the challenge from more of Malik's guards, but it was a small figure, he noticed with relief, Gareth emerging from his lofty hiding place. At once the heaviness lifted. If he had lost the dream of his youth, he had gained so much to replace it. The boy's smile turned to a concerned frown at the sight of the congealed blood staining his side and leg.
Gareth.
You were hurt.
He shook his head.
It's not as bad as it looks.
Rune pointed to the heavy doors leading to the interior of the royal palace.
You saw him enter.
Gareth nodded quickly, the fearful portents from all those dark dreams whirling about him. As Rune turned away towards the doorway, he laid a restraining hand on the man's arm.
It is in there.
I will follow.
But he has gone there to find a room to change. You will face the dragon.
There was a sob in the boy's voice.
He is hurt, Gareth. I have to end it. No one else can do this. Not even Hanik's blade could touch this monster. You know this.
The boy released his arm and looked down at the streaks of blood covering his left side. His voice was pleading as much with his own better judgment as with his father.
I will help you. I will come with you.
Gareth, no. There is nothing you can do. It will destroy you with its first breath.
The boy shook his head.
You are not protected.
Neither are you. Besides, I do not need the protection for what I must do.
You need it if you want to live.
Rune stepped closer and drew him into a tight embrace. He felt the frantic arms close about him.
Gareth, this is what I was born for.
And was I born to watch you die?
Rune pushed him away and held him at arm's length.
Thank you, son, for giving me this one chance. Be strong now. Stay here and wait for me.
He looked at the boy beseechingly.
Promise me you'll stay here.
Gareth could not reply in words. He nodded silently, though his eyes protested. Rune stretched out his free hand and ruffled the fair hair. Then he turned away abruptly and walked up the wide steps with that familiar stride from Kale's courtyard. The mad rush through tangled shrubs and thickets of grass came to an abrupt end before another door. Both women stopped to catch their breath. Haldred regarded the door with immense relief. Though there was no evidence for it, she was convinced that the silent figures had followed behind, remaining out of sight. The sooner they left this otherworldly veil, the better. The door moved with difficulty, swinging inwards. Both women pulled on it in haste, eager to escape the odd environ. The air beyond was moist and charged with the threat of rain. They stepped out into a dismal day, gray-clad and gloomy. A figure in front of the gateway whirled about to face them. Others stirred nearby. Haldred did all she could to prevent a scream from escaping her.
"Who are you?"
Asked the figure, a small man, a veteran. Ceridwen replied in haste.
We are from the towers. We are with Lord Veer.
The veteran frowned at them.
"Lord Veer is dead. We guard the portal for the last remnants of the host to pass through. What is your intention here?"
The woman stared at him in dismay. The battle was lost then. Ceridwen spoke in imploring tones.
Please, do you know who remains of our people? Is Lund still alive?
The frown deepened.
"I know not this land. The great beast Horan is before the gate. Pray that this land was not near him, or he would certainly be dead also."
Ceridwen turned to Haldred.
We have to go and see.
The veteran guard shrugged at them.
"Suit yourself, but we will not wait for you. Only for the Viran boy, if he comes.
Viran boy.
The young prince who came with Lord Veer, Gareth Sethrun.
Where is he?
The man pointed towards the dark city wall.
He is in the watchtower on the southern wall. Perhaps if you can get inside the city, you may find a safe place there. You will know about this one you seek."
Anik grimaced with pain. There was no strength for the art anymore, simply the grim fatigue that had him stumbling from one desperate opponent to the next. It was clear that the tour had no intention of surrendering. Interminable cycles of instruction in hate and fear had convinced them there would be no mercy from their arch-enemies, no quarter granted on the fearful day of reunion. They fought on doggedly, hopelessly, surrounded by the pressing allied forces from east and west, dying one by one, unyielding and resolute. Bjorn was at his side, the green fire still flaring from his blade on occasion, though with diminishing potency at every stroke. Soon the pair found themselves among the smaller, slighter figures of Lund's Viran band, appearing every bit as worn and bloody as they did. They halted finally, Anik flashing a tired grin at his companion. He leaned on his blade, breathing heavily.
This is a welcome sight.
Bjorn nodded in reply. He squatted down on his haunches and lowered his head, frowning. His powerful shoulders trembled as he drew in the heavy air through his open mouth. Anik dropped down on one knee next to him.
But for the beast, it is over.
He managed.
It is up to the exile now to finish it.
He looked about, concerned.
Have you seen him?
Bjorn nodded in the direction of the city wall.
He's in there, gone after that monster.
A small figure seemed to stand up out of the ground in front of them. Hanik's blade raised up instantly, challenging it. Sis smiled sadly and raised his hands placatingly.
The master calls for you.
Hanik and Bior stared at him for a few moments before they understood this request. They rose up dumbly to follow the Vadran. Karth of the Witch Isle, Kael the Summoner, Imran of the worlds beyond Myril, lay on his back amidst the torn grass and mangled bodies of the battlefield. Two Vadran tended him, having propped up his broken frame with a cloak-covered shield. The old man's eyes were closed, but they flickered open as the two approached. The two faithful captains from his host knelt down, one on each side of him. Kael spoke slowly, as if the effort of speech should not be wasted by mumbled or misunderstood words. Farewell, my friends. This body can no longer keep me in this world. Another figure joined them, kneeling down beside Hanik.
Let me decide that, Lord Kael.
The old man slowly moved his head from side to side.
Not even you can prevent my passing, Janos. The creature's venom has spread throughout my frame. I wait only for Byrand. That much I can still manage.
The fighting was almost over. Only among the ruins of the town did sporadic resistance occupy the Vadran and Aeronite archers. Not a single Tur warrior was to be seen, and thousands of marshlanders had thrown down their arms, kneeling in front of their captors. The Enrathians and Viran from Gilreth and the towers were no longer fighting. Byrand and his son followed a messenger back to the dying ancient. They knelt in turn next to Bior. Kael regarded them steadily for a few moments before addressing them.
Byrand, your return to the Art has saved the kingdom this day, and it has served to undo it. Having started on this road, you must complete the journey. There should not be a king in Viran henceforth. Each of the 5 overlords are to be equal, as of old, with no one dominating the others. Choose new settlers for the wasted cities to restore them. There are captains enough to serve as counts.
He fell silent, casting a stern look upon the Count of Gilreth, who nodded, overcome.
Promise me,
the rasping voice continued,
to burn my body with that of Vir in the morning.
He swallowed hard, shuddering.
I have a confession to make to you, and I need to beg for your absolution.
Byrand frowned heavily and raised a hand to protest the necessity of such an incomprehensible action.
No, hear me out.
The old man reached out for the raised hand, and Byrand lowered it to grip the gnarled fingers tightly. Kael stared straight into his eyes.
I am Kael the Summoner, whose foolishness brought the children of Vir to this evil day.
The Count of Gilreth and his son exchanged dismayed looks. The other Viran nodded to affirm this outrageous claim as they turned their questioning gaze upon them. The old man's hand was suddenly heavy and foreign in Byrand's.
What harm I have caused your fathers, my sons, I regret now even more severely than during any of these last 600 cycles. Yes, I was duped and betrayed by the Shadow, but I will not lay the blame entirely at Malik's door. My pride, my reputation, my stubborn arrogance made it impossible to admit defeat, even at the cost of everything that mattered. I was wrong. That is the simple truth. The debt I owe cannot be repaid. I humbly beg forgiveness from you, the ones who will reap the dreadful harvest that I have sown.
The hand was trembling between Byrand's fingers. A shudder passed through the body as Kale the Summoner breathed his last. Sith reached out to close the staring eyes. For long moments no one else moved or spoke. Janos rose up first. There was no trace of sadness in his voice.
Well, there is no point in sitting about this place. He's not here anymore.
Byrand released the lifeless hand and stood to his feet with the rest. He spoke to no one in particular, and to everyone, to the angry sky, the scorched field, the ruins.
As far as it is in my power to do so, I absolve you of any obligation, any further restitution to the realm of the Viron. There is no one without guilt in this affair, no one who was not deceived to some measure. Find your way in peace to whatever shore you are headed for.
As if in answer, there was a loud rumble of thunder overhead. The brilliant streaks of lightning filled the sky, and heavy drops began to fall. Soon all the fields and hills of Belruth were shrouded in a heavy blanket of rain. The sudden downpour served as an initial prompt to drive the waiting, fretting boy through the palace doors and into the dark interior. Gareth felt as if a barrier had been crossed, and this tiny act effectively annulled his agreement of earlier. He stared down the hall towards the temple stairs and the passage leading down to Huban's stores. A sudden memory stirred. Would the old man also be among the dead of Belruth? Had he been slain here in the palace he had served for so long? He tilted his head to listen intently. There was no sound but the hiss of the rain on the cobblestones outside, the relentless drumming on the tiles of the roof. Gareth hurried forward, apprehension knotting his stomach. Why could he not hear either of the two adversaries? Had Malik entered this place? Had he not seen him from the tower? He almost stumbled down the stairs in his haste. A single lamp was lit in the dark descending hallway at the foot. Still there was no sound, no motion. He slowed to a crawl, peering ahead into the murk. A sudden noise, perhaps of a door opening or shutting, made him press his back against the wall, his heartbeat quickening. Now he hurried forward as quietly as he could, convincing himself that the contest could not be over so soon, and that he would hear something if it had started at all. Perhaps Malik was hurt far worse than they supposed. Perhaps he had succumbed already. A figure lay prostrate on the floor of the passageway, shoved to one side against the wall. A silent cry rose up in him as he hurried over to it. The dead man lay face down, but he realized immediately that it was not Rune. It was a slighter, shorter figure, dressed differently. Gareth placed his bow on the floor, gripped the right shoulder, and pulled with all his strength to turn the body. A familiar face appeared, Huban the storeman. There was congealed blood on his chest and around his throat. They had murdered him also, the dark Tuor. A keyring fell from his belt, clinking loudly on the stones of the floor. Only now did Gareth notice the tapestry with its golden dragon, so out of place here where the doorway leading to the stores ought to be. Why had they moved it to this place? Had it been done purposely to conceal the entrance? He picked up the key. Here was a way to slip into the temple unobserved. He brushed aside the thick dusty curtain, embellished with its cruel mockery of Viron ignorance. The door was locked. He turned the key in the lock and shoved it open in haste. As he did so, his hearing picked up the faint exchange of voices floating up the main passage from below. Lund turned about mechanically, searching for an enemy. Slowly the madness slipped away from him, and the fire in his eyes dulled and went out. He became aware of his great fatigue, the ache of mind and limb that threatened to drop him down on his knees in the blood-soaked dirt. The battle seemed to be over, though he remembered not the end of it. Enough of his conscious thought returned to make him realize that the victory had to be theirs if he was still standing. Now he blinked as one waking from a dream, and looked about him to find if anything remained of his brave host. Men in a variety of colors and styles of armor moved about the field, yet none were familiar to him. He tramped through the dirt that was fast becoming mud, and suddenly understood that it was raining. He passed a figure kneeling over a boy clad in the colors of his band. The surcoat was unfamiliar to him. He caught a glimpse of the face, a Viron man, then looked down at the boy lying so still. It was Brennick. His heart missed a beat. Kneeling down beside the unmoving form, Lund surrendered to the utter exhaustion overtaking him. He pressed the bloodied blade into the ground and leaned his forehead upon it. A voice spoke next to him.
Yes, not dead, friend. Just resting.
Lund looked up to see the boy's eyes open abruptly, fixing themselves on him. Strangely, Brennick's expression reminded him of their first encounter, so many seasons before in the training pits of Grail. He had seen and appreciated the worship then, the fierce hope and adoration it could inspire in others. They had traveled a long way together since that day.
Brennick,
He said tiredly.
I thought you had decided to leave me at last. That you had died without me.
There was the flicker of a smile in reply.
I could not keep up with you.
Lund shook his head as he saw tears follow the admission.
You have done as well as any other.
As he spoke the words, bright joy invaded his mind, a touch of unbridled exuberance, making him lift up his eyes in surprise. Ceridwen came rushing towards him, through the muddy pools, the piled bodies, the groaning wounded. At once the dismal day was transformed into a sunny hillside, littered with cotton trees. No rational thought could account for her presence there, but his heart confirmed the vision, and his lips stretched into a tired smile. His apprehension increasing with every step, Rune sidled down the passage towards the temple. The huge door at the end was ajar, allowing the dull blue illumination from the temple fires to escape. He touched the sturdy frame, felt the weight of it give way as he shoved it open with his foot. The blade glowed in his hand, ready for any sudden ambush, but there was none. It was eerily quiet in the domed space. Slowly he scanned the dark recesses, the rows of empty seats rising from the arena floor, the flames. His heartbeat quickened. A solitary figure stood on the dais, in front of the remains of the stone statue. The great sculpture of the winged man had been shattered, with debris strewn all over the arena floor, the dais, even the front row of seats. Malik Yulian turned about to face him, slowly, as if he had expected this intrusion. As the crimson gaze swept over him, he shuddered with revulsion. Whatever the shadow had been in the past, however cruel and vindictive, the thing that stood here glaring at him, measuring, probing, was utterly and unalterably evil. Even the voice, formerly so smooth and carefully disdainful, had altered, consumed now by hate and the irrepressible desire to destroy. Yet something of the old deceiver remained in the motive behind the attempted persuasion. Rune knew instinctively that every word was false, and had as its goal only to gain advantage for the speaker. Malik meant to destroy him, consume him, feed on his substance and essence. There was no compromise to reach.
Lord Rune, you are a brave man to step into this arena with me. Brave or foolish?
The Viron did not reply. He inched forward, watching carefully, distrustful of his opponent's tactics. The shadow had come down here to shift his form once again, Gareth had said. He remembered the terrible transmutation from earlier, the tearing of the ground, the trees, those unfortunate to be too close in its proximity. The blade in his hand was like a conduit for another sense, beyond sight and hearing, discerning the intentions of this creature, and awareness of its guileful maneuverings.
Why would you do this? My battle is not with you. Kale is dead, and that cursed son of his who caused me so much harm.
Rune was almost surprised to find his own voice utterly calm and controlled, an echo from the arena.
I do not face you for his sake only. Your crimes are beyond revenge against those you call your enemies. I face you on behalf of all those you have harmed in your insane quest. Maybe even for yourself.
There was a derisive, sneering laugh.
What would you know about the motives of those who are not slaves of time? Do you think this Kale is so noble, so selfless? These precious ones you claim to represent, did they not turn you out? Did they not plan your humiliation, your exile, your death?
Rune noticed that the other carried no weapon. He was going to shift then. The voice droned on, pulling at his reasoning, persuasive, cloyingly seductive. He shut it out with an effort.
He is using you, even from his crypt. Can you not think for yourself? You are just a thrall in his designs, a slave to his pathetic scheming. There would be room for someone of your ability in the New Order.
New Order? I know what your New Order is all about, and there is no room for the Viron in it. You see, I have met your slaves from the Dankwood. They told me all about your ideas of order.
Rune was on the dais now, close enough for an effective attack. He noticed the other had realized this also. He was making subtle preparations for the contest. Malek the Undying shifted his feet slightly, his shoulders coming forward as if he was readying himself to pounce.
They told you perhaps what they wished, that they were mistreated, as all servants would exaggerate the injustice of their masters while defending their own faults and shortcomings.
He changed his tactics suddenly.
You cannot contend with me, princeling. You are immortal. There is no end to my days. Put up your blade and walk out while you still can.
Rune lifted the blade, Fenwith's legacy, slowly. He no longer heard the subtle words, the persuasive voice. His eyes were fixed on those of his opponent, challenging him to take whatever form he desired. A hissing noise, intense and urgent, proceeded from the crouching figure. Almost immediately, the world exploded into gyrating clouds of dust and debris, drawing everything within the circle inexorably towards the transmuting center. Rune leaped back in the direction of the doorway, stumbled over broken stone and rolled away from the maelstrom. A terrific pain shot up his side, leaving him gasping and dazed. The storeroom was deserted. A single forgotten lamp burned low in the wall sconce, casting faint illumination over the familiar scene. Gareth sighed to himself. The old storeman was no more. All of the bell Ruth from his early cycles had disappeared. A slight noise from among the shelves arrested his hurried pace. He paused, peering into the darkness. Was it the cat? What else could be lurking in this abandoned place? A slight figure emerged slowly from between the laden shelves, a composed blade in his hand, leveled at Gareth. The boy was too amazed at first to speak. Finally, he managed to whisper.
Then?
The tip of the blade quivered at the sound of his voice, and the already wide eyes seemed to stretch even wider. The older boy appeared pale, even in the wan light of the lamp, and passed his tongue over dry lips before he ventured a question.
Are you real?
Gareth put on a puzzled frown. Maybe this is what Janos had experienced at his own incredulity.
Of course. Don't you know me?
The blade tip remained inches away from his face.
Have you come for revenge?
What?
You're supposed to be dead. I was at your burning. You have returned from your ashes with that art of yours, haven't you?
Gareth gaped at him in astonishment. Perchance the poor fellow had lost his mind here, alone in the dark. Yet this was almost to be expected from the superstitious, nervous boy he had known before.
Then, you're the greatest idiot I've seen in my life. That was not my burning. They killed a poor shepherd boy in my place.
He reached out a hand.
Here, touch me.
The older boy recoiled from him, almost dropping the weapon. Gareth sighed and turned away towards the wall where the passageway was no longer obscured by the dragon tapestry. He glanced back over his shoulder and made one more attempt.
I am not a ghost, and I do not have time to argue with you. I must get to the alcove in the temple. Prince Rune is in there, with the dragon Malak.
Den's stare intensified with amazement and horror, but he lowered his blade.
What will you do?
Gareth pressed past Euban's desk with its litter of old quills and scrolls.
I don't know. Something.
He gazed into the dark tunnel, then rushed forward to join him, almost stumbling in his haste.
Wait, I'm coming with you. I don't want to be here by myself.
He kept his voice steady with supreme effort. Gareth noticed much of the fear he felt in the other's eyes. He nodded quickly and pointed with his free hand.
We will go to the alcove, through here.
They stepped into the small chamber that served as an entrance. Here he had hidden himself from the High Quester all those seasons before. Here he had heard the call from the winged man for the first time. It seemed so long ago now, as if it had happened to someone else. He turned to the other boy again.
You are sure? We have no protection. We cannot make a sound. If the beast should notice us, we are dead.
Den swallowed hard and nodded. His eyes stared fixedly down the dark passage. The terrific din rose up from below, the tearing of stone and timber, the sounds of the shifting he had witnessed earlier that day in the field. Would Rune be dragged into that monstrous perversion? Gareth pulled the frozen Den forward by his sleeve, suddenly grateful that there was someone else here with him.
Hurry now, and don't make a sound,
he whispered as they rushed into the darkness together. Rune was on his feet, the blade poised for a strike even before he could make out the massive form emerging from the dust. He was not to be granted an easy opportunity, though. Billows of flame flowed from the creature's open mouth, washing over him in waves, blinding, scorching, till he retreated in the face of it, not even considering the miracle of standing in such a storm without being consumed instantly. Somewhere a memory of Hunnick's escape from certain death sustained him, convinced him that the Septalion would hold. Still he fell back, unable to catch his breath, while the inferno raged about him. How long could the beast keep it up? Abruptly, the barrage ceased, leaving him reeling as if he had been leaning into a strong wind. He was off balance for a moment, disoriented. Almost too late he spotted the sweeping tail, lightning quick, aimed at crushing the life out of him. The strike was too powerful, weighted by hate and anger, fractionally slower than it could have been. This fact alone saved him. A desperately swift fall saw the tail passing inches above his prostrate body, its force not allowing for a sudden follow-up. The broken stone of the dais was an inch away from his staring eyes. Gareth could hear the flow of fire from the dragon as he pressed forward round the bend in the passage. He slowed abruptly before entering the alcove, holding Den back with him. They crept forward, hardly daring to breathe. Through the iron grille, a bright glow reached into the recess in which they cowered. The river of flame gushed out over a reeling figure Gareth knew to be his father. How could anyone survive that? He kept staring, praying, while his heart hammered in his chest. The figure was not consumed. He saw the tail sweeping, and the fire stopped. Almost he called out a warning, but the figure disappeared under the monster's attack, and was up again in an instant, striking back with the amber light from his blade. The blow was too quick to be effective, slicing through broken benches and debris next to the beast. Already the fire flowed from it once more, driving back its opponent, blinding him. Rune realized that this was no equal contest. The monster would not trade blows with him, or give him the chance to use his weapon properly. He was striving against the god, an ancient who had many lifetimes to perfect his art. The flames kept swirling about him, paralyzing, suffocating, finally pinning him against the wall, and the monster all the while preparing for a death blow, its tail curling, arching upwards into the dark above. The armor blazed bright blue, but it would not hold, could not hold. There were too many crimes, too many debts for which to atone. His guilt was augmented till it towered to the stars, doubt flowed about him, through him, like the flames, making his hands tremble. His senses were overcome with the terrific potency, the insurmountable threat of the beast before him, wounded as it was. He was a traitor, a monster who was unworthy of trust, of forgiveness. From the afterworld, Sear stood as a final indictment, one that no amount of atonement could appease. And in the living world there was Gareth. Gareth. Solemn words, uttered with complete sincerity and conviction in the semi-dark of that faraway hovel in the marshes, echoed in his ears once more.
I do forgive you.
The boy's eyes, blue pools like his mother's, convinced him. Aethera had never blamed him, not in those long desolate cycles of separation, and she did not blame him now. Rune looked up, into the inferno, and saw the tail coming round in its deadly sweep. This time he struck at it, standing tall, fearless and confident. The blade responded in a searing blaze, severing the spiked tip of the creature's tail and drawing a roar of surprise and rage from it. Then dropped to his knees at the sound, his blade forgotten on the floor. Gareth flinched violently, almost dropping his bow. The deafening sound echoed in the domed space, bringing dust sifting down from the invisible ceiling. A change came over the Lochty. It lowered its massive head, peering at the man in front of it as if noticing him for the first time. The enormous wings opened up, and its frame went into a crouching position, like a predator stalking its prey. Rune backed away slightly, the blade ready in his hand. If the thing would charge him, the contest would be over quickly. All that remained of his strength, of his resolve, of his soul, he would pour into that final strike. There was no way to miss at such close range. But the beast was toying with him, pretending, leading him on. Even as he lowered his defenses for the decisive blow, it prepared a new attack. The fire belched forth again, though not as bountiful as before, concentrated around the figure rather than engulfing the entire dais in flame. Rune found himself on the defense again, reluctantly relinquishing his gathered potential. Gareth watched the drama unfolding and realized what the beast was about to do. It would close the gap between itself and the prey, while Rune was unable to see properly, then attack with fang and claw, crushing the man with its massive bulk, while not allowing him the opportunity to strike back. The strength drained from his body, his fingers. There was no escape for the warrior, for his father, and there was nothing to do but watch helplessly. The dragon inched forward. Rune had raised his left arm against the flowing fire, as if to ward it off and allow him a better view, but his head was down, his body twisted away in pain. The blood was seeping through his garments again, pooling round his left foot. The boys looked on in horrid fascination, then glanced back at Gareth, his eyes displaying alarm. Yes, thought the younger boy, he knew it too. He would not, could not endure it. Tears started in his eyes. Somewhere there was a loud cry, the need for silence forgotten. His fingers clenched themselves round the stave of Beric's bow, as if they would crush it. Perhaps... Gareth reached for the remaining chrysolite arrow, purposely ignoring the vivid memory of the beast's anger, the pain in the watchtower, the warning that he had no septalion to ward away the fire. Below him the monster was mere yards away from its prey, Rune deaf and blind in the raging storm. The feathered shaft touched the string. He glanced down at it hurriedly to make sure, and stared in surprise. The bow had changed, charged with light shimmering in his hands, the arrow a beam of amber, and he knew that it was not the strength of the bowstring that would deliver it, but the anguish in his heart. Gareth drew back the arrow. Fear not the dark. Limit not your soul. The bows sang. The shaft sped on, flowering into the fire of composed chrysolite, blue and green, amber and purple. The voice was his and the Sear's, a cry to pierce all the regret, all the painful longing for redemption. And the colors united in a blaze of white searing light. The Lochty that was Lauren heard it and hesitated. It turned its monstrous head, a memory of weakness suddenly invading the boiling madness. In that moment the arrow entered its left eye, burning through scale and flesh till it lodged within the enormous skull. The billows of fire ceased abruptly. The trapped victim stumbled forward, almost blundering into the scaled bulk before him. The huge claw caught him before he could draw back, flinging him back against the wall. Gareth heard the crunch as the body struck the stone, hard enough to knock the wind out of it. Rune almost dropped the blade. The armor of composed chrysolite flared about his frame in tides of bright blue. The beast seemed confused suddenly, twisting its head from the victim in front of it to the hidden assailant that had pierced its defenses with such disconcerting ease. The claw reached up as if it would attempt to remove the shaft from the eye. Instead, it shook its head and bellowed in pain and anger. Rune seized the opportunity. Gripping the blade in both hands, he stepped out from the wall, among the blue flames of the temple torches. Orin noticed him and leaped forward once again to prevent a strike. The blind eye affected its estimation of the range, and it overreached, scraping the wall above the man's head. Rune's blow was delivered from so close that the tip of his weapon actually touched the creature's hide. The force of it left him gasping with pain, a strange taste in his mouth. The beast was reeling, disoriented, clumsy. Now was the moment, his chance to end it all. He abandoned all thought of evasion and defense. Every last ounce of strength he poured into the blade, giving all the long cycles of bitter hate and loneliness. All the hope revived at the end, every last shred of his resurrected dream. A prayer reached up, a cry to the nameless keeper of destinies, as the wielder of Fenwith's blade relinquished all claims on life. Orin was turning back to launch a final feeble attack when the blow found him. It ripped through the armor of the chest, just below the throat, tore a rift from left to right all the way across. The searing blaze was so bright the boys behind the beast had to turn away and shield their eyes from it. Rune stumbled and fell to his knees, the world about him tilting into darkness. Orin Invernog, the erstwhile Lord of Tiralan, screamed in utter despair as his powerful form came apart. The huge body, now a lifeless mass, collapsed onto the Viron's sprawling figure, around which, at last, the blue fire had been extinguished.